idea of why on earth did I have that? She's got me as a sort of reading hieroglyphs. Right, can you just refresh what back on the main screen? Because we're all here now. Right, it is working. It's working now.
Joined it, Daddy.
But for some reason, it's got a picture of hieroglyphs. Anyway, don't worry, I'll change the graphics later. People have to catch up. Is anyone else watching yet? Hey, watching, I'll give people catching up now. I'll tell you what, I shall, what we're calling the trade, this is what they call knitting. Knitting is when you have a gap to fill. Because we got to just give people a chance to log in. Hello everyone, welcome back to part 2. No, this is not about hieroglyphs, and no, it's not that crazy, but it is the same crazy person. There's a picture of me holding a cake, going, I might eat the cake, and that's our trailer. But if you've been following part 1, you can jump into part 2, and hopefully, well, you have worked it out, otherwise you wouldn't be listening to it
now. Otherwise you're not watching.
Yeah, so hopefully you've worked it out, but you must have done, otherwise you wouldn't be here. For those who didn't, sorry, you'll never get my apology either. So, right, what I'd like to do, Robert, if you wouldn't mind, if you go back slightly, because it got really echoey at the end, and it was just very difficult to follow. So if you could,
want to look at that slide
screen
again?
sharing again, and what I'd like to do, if you wouldn't mind, if we could pause when you got the guy going up the slope. So I'd like you to explain why the water's wet, why it hasn't all flowed away.
Okay.
Because I think you can do that. That ties in with. Oops, sorry, that's me getting in the way. Could you do that for us?
Yeah.
Because we're kind of back to the same point then, aren't we? Where the water's clinging to the hill almost.
Clinging to the hills.
And also another question I had was: are there any? Have you ever looked for any slopes in Brazil or somewhere like that, or any sort of swampland area where we could look for a similar effect or a similar thing? I don't know what you call it. What would you call it? What would you call it? Phenomenon. Phenomenon. There we go. Because, like you said, the flow doesn't really matter. But again, once again, if that was... do you have to know if this boy is dragging it up a steep bit or a shallow bit? That kind of question. And does the Amazon have any steep bits, if you happen to know?
I mean, this shot basically shows that you can drag a boat on very shallow water.
Very shallow water.
I totally get that. It's a very clear demonstration. Yes.
This is mountain. That's not hill. This is actually mountain kayaking. So they're going up to 1,000 feet. For the lakes. But to get there, to access it, they're going to have to go up some unbelievably steep slopes to get up there, and they have to do it by dragging it.
So the whole slope's got water on it then, is it somehow?
The whole slope's got water. Because it's up a mountain, it's got a very high water table. And even today, it leaks. And what you've got there is marshland. What marshland is basically leaking water. It's not a river, but it's like a sponge. Think of it as a giant sponge. If it's saturated, when you put your finger on it, you get a pool of water. This is what happens. And if you try and visualize the past as Britain being a giant sponge, full of water, everywhere you go would be full of water. Now we've actually left it for 10,000 years. It's a long time. 10,000 years. Same period where the Sahara Desert has taken over from a tropical forest. We got away with it quite lightly if you think about it, water-wise, didn't we? In comparison to the Sahara Desert. But at the end of the day, it still was waterlogged 5,000 years ago. It wasn't as waterlogged as 10,000 years ago, but the water table was high. Every time it rained, the rain, as we saw, remember we saw that little graphic saying that no water has ever penetrated the soil for 6,000 years. I mean, that's a huge graphic. If it's not penetrating the soil, when it rains, take this guy with the boat. When it rains, and this is 5,000 years ago, when it rains on this area, and it will rain, it's you've got a waterlogged environment, and sun will saturate the rain. It's a basic hydrology, and it will rain. If none of that rain is actually being soaked into the ground, it's got to sit on the surface. This is the big thing. It's got to sit on the... And if we know that the water hasn't been absorbed for 6,000 years, the only conclusion you can come to is, well, all that water is on top. It will, Bob's principle, it will float with gravity. I'm not saying it's going to be anti-gravity. It will, but because it's so saturated. I mean, again, take the sponge as an option. Which way does the water flow in the sponge? You know, I'm sure it does flow, but it's very hard to tell because the sponge is completely sodden. So, you know, to actually identify that water's going up, down, left, right, almost impossible. Here...
Can I say, Bob, have you ever walked up slopes where the water's all the way up the slope? Or you say you've done this kind of thing?
Yeah, but it's been, if you're walking up a surface like that, I tend to think that's fairly level where it is there. But you can walk up surfaces where it's flat like that. You've got the vegetation. The vegetation is acting, if you like. It's a series of multitude of mini dams. And the water flow is then being held back. And the point that Robert making is, I've done it myself. You don't need much water to provide, to eliminate the friction. If you're dragging your boat on the ground, ultimately you drag a big hole out the bottom of it because it gets a. But if you're dragging it across a country like that, the water then sort of cushions it and makes it easier to drag. So I can buy into that. They're obviously as you start moving up the slope, the water flow will then start to flow. And once water starts to flow, ultimately it does do what it does. It ends up in a channel rather than dispersed.
You do see water trickling down hills, I imagine. You know, I've seen that.
But I mean, again,
basically sheep flooding down a hill. It's the same kind of thing.
Again, you're visualising it as it is today.
True.
Yeah.
True, yeah.
And you got this is what I said. That wasn't like that.
No.
Because what you would have is all these natural what they call springs.
Yeah.
And you know, we usually get a single spring and it turns into a stream. I mean, you've seen that coming down hills. You go, oh, that's fine. Just this one got to the surface. Imagine if it was 100 springs springing out. You know, you wouldn't have one. You'll have 100, and them all those all that cascading water sort of joins together as a whole. In the end of the day, you can't identify where the spring is.
Yeah, it'd almost be like a film of water sliding down the side of the hill, I guess.
It's a sheet of water running down, basically down the hill, and if it's being fed by springs, it's a continual one. So you haven't got a torrent of water all forced into a channel. You've got a whole sheet of it running down the hill.
Yeah,
I mean,
I can visualize that. I've seen that kind of thing in my life. So
there was a
scene with imagination. The problem is when we think canals, we always think like 6 feet deep, don't we? You know, with great big locks and all that. As
which canals are you looking at?
There's on your Facebook group. I found two really quite interesting videos. I don't know if any of you saw them. One was a reenactment how the Vikings did it. It was from the TV series, and the Vikings pulled the boat up from the shore. Talk about they didn't bother dragging it. They winched it up and then put it on rollers and dragged it across land to the next lake, and then sailed on. And because that's what they would do. At the end of the day, if the surface was flat, they would have put it on rollers. If the surface wasn't flat, what they would have done is just put buckets of water. Because what will happen, you make mud. Now, there was another one about a true story where someone actually put a steam ship over a mountain, steam ship over that. Now, they done a reenactment. The film was pretty naff, but if you looked at the reenactment, forget about the winches and they tried to do it by logs as well. But because they were actually trying to soak the kit, the winches, what they did underneath by complete accident is turn the channel into a big mud slab, like a mudslide. Now they put logs in to try and drag it, and you thought, well, actually, that's counterproductive. If you got rid of the logs, if you got rid of the logs, you would have better. Absolutely, it's like you're greasing the slope with mud. Mud's brilliant for that. Or, bit of clay, bit of mud. It's just straight. It's it's cutting down the resistance from friction. And even if at a later date, because remember these things lasted thousands of years. Initially, I should think there was actually sufficient water. That's fine, But as time went on, these canals got harder because the water levels dropped. And then rather than actually having water up the slope, they probably would have mud. And you probably would go to the top with a couple of buckets. Bob, you was talking about new tech. You could introduce other technology to assist you in the canal. Then you would put something else in. You could actually take some buckets up and just throw it on the floors because it would go down with gravity to turn it into a mudslide. And then you drag your boat up. It's the thing would adapt it. And to me, the fascinating thing about these canals is the bank, because originally the banks would have been shallow. But what we find, particularly different from, you've done both Offa and you've done Wansdyke. I've done both. But with Wansdyke, they're quite peaky. Wherever at Offa, they're quite, they're 20, 30 meters wide. And to me, you know what that is? It's, when that dike, as you saw in that shot, when the dike stopped being full of water, they would have basically just padded this out and used it as a road.
This is my question now.
It's the logical thing to do, isn't it? Why do you want to build a road? You can just follow the dike road.
Where does the dike come into it then? If we got this water sliding, how would the dike help that poor bloke who was dragging his boat up the hill? And also, I just want one extra comment, Johnny Enigma.
Yeah.
Stop echo, fill your mouth with food. I'm sorry about that. I've got this bag of sweets. I got to stop. I'll put it miles away, all right? There we are. I'll put my hands in.
But, it's this analysis. So you look at it and go, okay, it's there full of water. That's great. That water will eventually dry up. What's left? You've got that left. And you go, well, okay, I'll use it as a road. If you think about ancient footpaths, that's what it is. It's for me.
So it wasn't always a canal. Once the water went away, it just became a footpath because it goes to the right places.
Because you're going. It's a little bit like what we were saying at the end with these women. These women, there's parts of this walkway here, especially up here, which actually follows where my house was. There's actually a river that flows next to it, which is quite interesting.
It is.
So part of it go, well, actually, when you got to about here, you would have bunged everything in a boat and you just take it down because that boat went all the way into Lewis's market because the Lewis's market was down by the river. So, and this was known as the Winterval stream. The interesting aspect of it, it only was big at wintertime, Winterval, obviously. But in the past, it would have been a proper stream full time. So why walk when you could eventually actually probably have a boat or someone probably get paid to punt you down the last part of, because that's a big walk. It's 7.8.
Yeah, twice a day. Yes, good going. Isn't it?
And on one side, part of the dike ended up being a Roman road anyway, didn't it?
Well, that's what gives me. I love that piece of road because you obviously saw the illustration by Stukely.
Yeah.
Which is a great. I don't know if you've seen it, Ross. It's a great illustration. There's a guy actually at the top of the illustration. There's a guy being hung at the top of it. There's a guy dead at the top of this illustration. That was used as a warning to people to stay out of our town. It's real Wild West stuff. It's really true. But it showed that the Roman road is on top. It has to be. It cuts through the bank. It's on top of Wansdyke. And you go, well, actually,
you lost me a bit. How does that show the road goes through the top?
Well, the road sits on top of Wansdyke.
Of the dike, the Roman road.
It sits on top of the dike.
So the dike became a road.
It's supposed to be post-Roman. Wansdyke's supposed to be post-Roman.
No, it's supposed to be post-Roman. Yet the Roman road is on top of it.
Yeah, it's And archaeologists have been doing this since day one, and they still come up with this idea.
Right.
It's like you go,
So you've got a
how
dike,
come?
and on top of the dike, they've utilised that to form the basis of a road.
I don't put the road on it.
But
I
then
mean, what should happen? The Roman road.
But the dike was built 200 or 300 years after the road.
But the best way of dating it, at the end of the day, if one's dike was medieval, the road would have been dug up.
The road would have been underneath, wouldn't it? Yeah.
But that what gets me is the excuses that archaeologists come, and I pointed this out to a form to archaeologists once. He said, well, they appreciated the Roman road and therefore would have utilised it. And you go, why? If they were going to use the Roman road, why go over the hill? The road goes off at right angles.
It goes off, doesn't it?
Yeah. And you go, well, if they appreciated the road, why don't they just follow the road? It's already built.
Yeah,
why would you want to dig a hole over the top of it if it's already? There's the most ridiculous excuse.
I'm a firm believer that the laziest way was the most likely way. People don't look for work, do they?
I'm a very practical. I'm saying, it's not the Grand Union Canal, and if you think it's the Grand Union Canal, it's a water, it's a quaggy, if you want. I should used to call them quaggy. It's a quaggy where you can drag your boat.
Excellent.
Because it's much easier to drag a boat than push a cart.
Excellent. No, it's fantastic. If we want to go back to full screen, I think that was brilliant there.
Okay, I'll get rid of that.
What we could do with finding as well is I am curious, well, not now, but some point, have a look, see if there's what the steepest parts of the Amazon are as well. That'd be interesting to see, wouldn't it? If that's
I don't know. I know there's other dikes in other Nordic countries.
Oh, okay.
So dikes do exist, like long barrows, which is this is the same civilization. People who built the long barrow also done dikes, and the classic dike.
Yeah.
Is Holland. Oh, there's lots of dikes in Holland. Anyway, so Denmark, Holland, Netherlands. You've got dike systems there. So to me, it's the same civilization using the same ideas. So I haven't seen anything further than that, like the Amazon.
Well, one thing
Who knows?
Okay, we'll have to look at that. One thing, I'll go to Bob in a second, see if he answers his questions. But one observation I noticed from seeing fields anywhere in the world, here, I noticed them in Florida, England, where you have got the drainage ditches, they've always got a layer of water in them. They just all year round, unless it's really hot summer.
Yeah,
there's a constant
line
of water around the edge of the field, isn't it?
The other place you would get canals, but a little bit more, I would believe, because it's like 2,000 years later, more sophistication, probably from the same civilization, is Egypt. Now, they now know that canals brought the stones from Aswan to the pyramids, because the again, we're talking about the flooding. The Nile was obviously much bigger in the past. The interesting aspect, I've done some one or two field trips there, but what's interesting, the famous nine pyramids, if you actually look at the topology, when the Nile floods, all nine of them were on the shorelines of the Nile. So, and then when they got to the Nile, they put little canals. So it's the engineering, this ancient engineering, is not unique to Britain. They probably used first in Britain. It's probably the roughest.
It's not that difficult, really, is it? If you build a ditch, it's hard to keep the water out, usually, isn't it?
Well, that's why I was trying to show that illustration. So you just put, take a bit of mud out of it. You've got yourself a ditch and you've got yourself a bank. I mean, it's not rocket science. And when I look at prehistoric buildings and prehistoric architecture and design, I'm thinking, what is the simplest version of this? What's the simple, nothing science fiction, what's the simplest thing, but to show we've got an imagination to actually turn around and say, it's much easier to push a boat than it is to walk over land.
What's your thoughts there, Bob?
I am 100% behind Robert on the fact that in the past, the mainstream archaeologists and historians are underestimating how much reliance was placed on boat traffic. Everywhere around the world I've seen, boat traffic is been much bigger. The problem that for the archaeologists and historians is we don't find that many remains of boats because they're made of wood. And the ones that they do find, they all end up being Anglo-Saxon rather.
That's like it's that again, yeah.
But Bobby, I do have. I know because I know you don't like Google Maps, and you use
I use them all the time, but they have limitations.
But I mean, and I've got the same question you say. I've been walking down this, and it's a huge gradient down and up again, and a dike, a canal couldn't go that way, and they're right. And I didn't have time to do a proper graphic, but I drew it this time. So I'm gonna give you an illustration. This is part of Offa's Dikes, just outside. I think it's Chepstow. I don't know if you can see that now.
Right. Yeah.
What happens here? The Offa's Dyke, and according to the Urban Survey, because they don't realise there's only little bits in it, not a complete. They put it as a complete line down and up, so it confuses people. Everybody thinks it's well known, but what's interesting, the dike actually finishes here and starts again here. Now, in the past, that would have been a river.
Yeah.
As the river has got less and less and less, they've either tried to connect it up a bit more, or eventually given up completely. And added roadway, because some of these, what really interesting. Now, Offa's Dyke, the famous aspect of it is that the ditch is on the English side. Yeah, some of these, the ditch transposed the other way.
Yeah.
It's on the other side. You go, how'd that happen? And it's because they didn't care where the ditch was, because all they was doing is digging a hole. And this is what the first one. I actually, when we went through that, I was actually telling people how deep the ditch was and how wide the bank was, because on this bit here, which should be defensively the biggest, it's actually the shortest.
It's the short,
And it doesn't make any sense. The only logical fact is that, okay, this was a river. The river's dried up. They want to continue that walkway because it's marshy. It's still going to be marshy. It was a riverbed. It's going to be. So what they've done is dug a shallow ditch just to put the bank up to carry on the road, basically. And that would explain why some of these, as you quite rightly point out, these gradients are huge. And you go, yeah, you're right. That doesn't make a lot of sense. But when you see it, it's actually, that's why I do like Google. You can actually see the landscape of where it is, and you say, oh well, actually, when the river was higher, that would have flooded, and it would have been like an inlet of the river, so that they wouldn't use it. The other thing that people quite right says, so, well, if there's a river there, why not use it? Why would you bother with a canal? Which is a very good point. The problem with rivers is that they flow. I used to live by the Thames. I mean, these are powerful rivers. In the book, you probably saw, I estimated that the rivers were something like 70 times larger in the past than today. Now, if you've got a small boat and you've got a flowing river and the river only goes one way, how do you actually sail against it? I mean, the River Thames is lucky because you've got the sea. It becomes tidal. It goes both ways. But if the sea was lower, which it was in the past, the Thames would only go one way, and it would have gone so fast that the chance of you actually sailing, you couldn't sail against it. It'd be too fast. It'd be a one-way trip. So again, you go, why not just use rivers are big. The rivers is like white water rafting. There would have been a very difficult prospect. So you would prefer to actually have a much shallow, easier river than actually use a river. And that's the other question I had from people. How come they didn't use rivers? Rivers are not practical, far too quick. Now, but as the rivers got smaller, and this is Wansdyke again, the more they went inland, the shallower they become. And that's why, if you look at the interesting aspect of offers Dyke is that you've got a southern bit, you've got a northern bit, but no bit in the middle.
No bit in the middle, no.
And this is your gravity bit, because the river in the middle would have been the least active. It'd be shallower and probably you'd be able to navigate it, rather than the other two aspects, which one went to obviously the Bristol Channel, the other one went to the North Sea. These would have been far too fast and quick to navigate. The bit in the middle, though, because you don't have as many springs forming it, so it'd be much more shallower, would have been easy to navigate, and that would answer the question: why is there a north and south part of the Dyke? Which again doesn't make sense, does it? Unless you look at it from a sort of a river point of view.
Oh, I guess brilliant. This was a quick hello here. Robert Settle, all the way from, hope I got this right, the Ozark Mountains in Missouri. That's a swampy land, isn't it? So I get you see, you could try yeehaw. But I was thinking over there, they have those little, what do they call them? You've seen the James Bond films, like a floats with a great big hairdryer on the back, and they only need like an inch or two of water, don't they? That's a similar principle. They use those to get around, don't they? There's no moving water as such. What?
Hovercraft.
Well, it's like a hovercraft. They're not hovercraft. What do they call them? No, they have this great big fan on the back. You must have seen them.
Yeah.
It's like a float with a fan on it.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. And also, apparently the cake I must be eating is sponge cake. Very good, Johnny Nigma, as always. Yeah. And the lazy geniuses are the ones who always work things out. I think this is genius. I don't think you're lazy, Robert, but I think it's an absolute genius. It just
I'll wait for Bob. I'll wait for Bob to give me the answer to the.
He's
worked it already. He's worked it already.
I've got people on here with. We got hydraulic jumps and Archimedes screws and all sorts of things. But tell us about pushing water uphill anyway, Bob, because it is interesting.
What I'll go into actually is hang on, am I sharing now?
Brilliant.
What I want that one first. Right,
I just got these visions of Bob's sorting that out of people just. It just makes perfect sense, doesn't it? You can imagine. I'm not even sure they'd bother using pack animals. I mean, I'm not sure how domesticated animals were, but that picture of the guy walking along, and like you said, in the early days, you might not even need a tow path originally. You'd just be dragging it, and then people would think, let's make a little path be easier than getting our feet wet. And you can imagine it developing over time, couldn't you?
Yeah, well, the thing is, when you see that medieval people walk, the Judd Road, Judd actually means Judd is a basket. It means it is a fish basket. That's why they call it Judd Road. When you see that, you go, "Wow, people really." This is the thing, I guess, where you go, people. It's part of the human psyche to trade. It is part of the it's part of what makes us what we are, and we sort of. The prehistory is sort of we didn't bother. We walked around with a spear and a loincloth on and just killed the animal. You go, I think we've done a bit more than that. To me, it's discrediting the past.
But to me, the fisherman's the perfect example. What on earth are you going to do with a net full of fish?
Absolutely.
Even if you really went for it, you could only eat 3 or 4. You don't need a net full of fish. And there's no point in putting a smaller net out because you might not catch anything. So you get a good day and you got this blinking load of fish. You're going to try and get something for them, aren't you? I mean, else are you going to do? Just chuck them away? I mean, it's pointless.
It's how you make your money. I mean, it's a 0 hour minimum wage job, isn't it?
You make me a stool or a bench or something, and I'll bring you fish for the next 2 weeks, something like that, isn't it?
You go to market and you go to market with your fish, and you can either sell it for money or you barter.
Yeah, as I'm saying, I'll bring you a fish every day for the next few weeks if you dig my garden or whatever it is, isn't it? Yeah. Well.
But that's the nature of humans, isn't it? To do that trading, and when we start the other thing that looking at what's coming out now, and it's taken some time. We now see in Yorkshire there was the salt mine. But it's an industrial size salt mine. It's not for personal use. This is industrial. They're making salt to trade in the ninth millennium, and then there's I think in the Fens they found a huge 5 mile fish farm where they caught the fish in these nets. And you go, well, that's not for personal consumption. You're trading, you know. So this requirement to trade.
Yeah, well, I think it's absolutely important, because I think one of the things where, well, I think some archaeologists are aware of it. We're looking at the lodge, the guy, I forgot his name, the one who did the Lodge Hill archaeological dig. He makes a very good point in there, which is often missed, that the reason you find dispersal of jars over areas is because they were carrying the trade goods. This is why you see a pot in one place, the same as a pot in another place. Because, funny enough, you mentioned salt. Salt was one of the goods, and you need a specific type container, I suppose, to keep it dry and whatever you need. And he reckons you could tell a lot of the goods that were being traded by the shapes of the pots. The pot's nothing to do with, this is the whatever style or the whatever style. It's the best thing is yeah, if you're shifting salt, you need a different container to if you're shifting wine or beer or something, you know.
Well, it's a little bit like the archaeology of the future going through our bins, and there's all their plastic wrapping. They go, well, they worship the god of the plastic bag, because we find nothing but plastic bags. They obviously liked them because they kept them and put them in there in containers.
Well, exactly.
So obviously,
I think the same things happen with the beaker cult and all this kind of thing. You know, it's a load of nonsense. Absolutely. I think just because the beakers move around, I mean anything.
It's frightening the amount of misinterpretation in history. It really is.
Yeah, I think Bob's all fired up to go now.
One of the points I will make looking at this is, and I find it quite interesting, we said that the Wansdyke isn't continuous. It's the mainstream archaeologists and historians trying to make it into a continuous thing right from one end to the other. But actually, when you walk it, the dike and the ditch disappear at intervals. And what I find quite interesting here is on this section here, East Wansdyke, on the left hand side, where the dike and the ditch ends, it's 180 meters in elevation. On the east side, going towards Savernake Forest, where the ditch and the dike ends, actually physically ends, it's 180 meters height. Now, there's a 175 meter height where the road, I don't see if you can see my cursor somewhere. Right here. You see my cursor here? This is Shepherd's Shaw, where the road runs through it. On the road, the elevation is 175 meters, but actually the ditch and the dike are 5 meters higher up. Everything ends at 180 meters.
Wow.
Now, I only discovered this today when I was preparing this slide, looking at the elevations. I hadn't picked up on it before, but there seems to be a 180 meter height thing here, which is, where the dike ends and the ditch ends, 180 meters. When you get to that 175 meter bit, there's no ditch and dike there. You got to go 5 meters up either side of the road to get the height. So everything seems to. So this could be an indication of what Robert's saying, is that these dikes are then going into hitting existing.
Yeah, that 180 would be the water level, wouldn't it? Yeah.
I forgot. I don't know if you've seen it. I've got a graphic for this. You're quite right. It's 180 meters. Because actually, if you actually add the water levels to that, it becomes like an island. It cuts through the middle, so you would have the water level on both ends. You're quite right. Would have been the same, and it's actually gone through the centre. That's why it's fascinating. You go, so what was on the island? What was interesting? Yeah. What's in the middle? And because it's obviously greatly important. You go, well, what's in the middle of that then? So it must be something they wanted to go and see. It's like it must be in a trading site. It must be a very important trading site in the middle. But we've lost it.
Exactly. Otherwise,
why build it? It's a little bit like I suppose nowadays, if you think about it, if in the future we're all dead and they find motorways, you go, I wonder what they're for. And you go, and then you realise they connect hubs of occupation. And you go, that's what they're for. Because otherwise, why do you spend time and money building the bleeding thing? It's got to have a purpose. And to me, it's got to have a purpose. And it's not, say, you can't be to say, oh, I'm a big king. Look at the big ditch I've built.
Yeah.
It's a bit, really? and most of these things, particularly markers, you only know they're markers if you got a map. Because if you bought it, it's a little bit like the Office diet. I did have a bit of a rib with someone to say, well, it's by the Wye, I think it is, the River Wye. And I said, well, why didn't the king say my land is from the River Wye to wherever? And they go, no, it's not to the Wye. It's because they would have to explain these to Ross, to the Welsh. You have to, no, my land is not the River Wye. It's about 10 meters behind the River Wye. You're not allowed to go. You can go up to River Wye, but you can't go 10 meters beyond. You go, and where you're standing, you go, well, I can't see it. You go, well, it's not. It's behind that hill. But if you do, it's a Monty Python sketch, isn't it? If you do go there, you're in big trouble. Okay. And you go, why don't you just make it the River Wye? Everybody knows where it is.
Yeah,
why would you?
Borders are on rivers, aren't they? Because you were saying something the other day about markers, weren't you, Bob, when you were walking for ley lines and stuff?
Yeah. In the 70s and 80s, I spent a lot of time doing ley lines, the Alfred Watkins version of ley lines, the original. And if you walk in some of those, you're plotting straight lines on the map, and you're walking them. And we were coming up to things like hedgerow, and you are delving the hedgerow, and all of a sudden you find this great big huge marker stone, which is directly on the ley line that you plotted, but it's not shown on any mapping or anything like that. But there's this great big huge stone which has been hidden in the hedge for hundreds of years, and you keep on finding things like that as you're going along. Where the track crosses a ford is miraculously smack on this ley line. And I spent more than a decade sort of walking up and down these ley lines. And at the end of the day, all I can honestly say is they exist. The reason why they exist, I still don't have a clue. But it's got nothing to do with energy or anything like that. Or
I think they're just they're trading route. I mean, if you think about it.
That was Alfred Watkins' original thing.
If you go from A to B, you take the shortest route, don't you? Yeah. I mean, this is why I talk about round barrow, the original round barrows. I mean, because I've done the same as you. I used to do, it's where actually I met Mike Parker Pierce doing one of these. I used to go barrow walking, and it's quite interesting. Parts of it are straight, but parts of it are not straight, depending on the landscape. But it's a little bit like Roman roads, They say it's straight, but actually, it's the easiest. It's the least
distance,
effort to go from A to B. But with these barrows, they're interesting when they still exist, and they're really it's only around Stonehenge at the moment. When you stand on top of the barrow, you can see the next one. It's that sort of. It's a little bit. It's prehistoric GPS. You stand on top,
which is exactly what Alfred Watkins was saying. Is that they are just used as marker lines down the valley, up the other side, and you just keep following the signs.
Because the logic is okay. There's a lot of stuff in archaeology that say, I'm quite happy to say that Stonehenge was a centre for illness. That's fine. A hospital.
Sorry, a centre for what? Sorry?
Illness, hospital.
Oh, healing. You mean then? Is it?
Healing.
Yeah.
All right, okay.
Now you have to get there somehow. I mean, and the likelihood, you walking around and saying Stonehenge, and people go, "What are you talking about?" Unless you got something marked out. How do you get there? There's a lot of discussion about Dorrington Walls and Blickmead, because they now found all these bones, which is 6th or 7th millennium old, but the animals come from Scotland. Some of the animals come from Scandinavia, and you go, how did they know how to get there? I mean, does the logic go, okay, I'm in Scotland with my cow, and I want to take it to Stonehenge.
Yeah, exactly.
How do you get there? Are you going to walk from Scotland to Stonehenge? And if so, that's fine. Have you got to have these little markers saying, John O'Groats, what we do that way? And if so, what is it? I mean, and this is where you get standing stone. You go, well, I wonder if once upon a time the standing stone had marks on it, because he won't have any now because it's 9,000 years old. Anything that was on it's gone. It's eroded. And is this where the Romans got their idea of milestones? Because if you look at it, although Romans are credited for milestones, no one's ever taken credit for it in
I
Rome.
wouldn't go too much with the milestones, as Alan Wilson says in the book I was just reading through his notes about Britain, allow it not being Roman, and he says they love calling these things milestones, overlooking the obvious fact that they're not every mile, there's no numbers on them, and what is it? This is the three things. The first thing is they're not enough of them, and they don't have any numbers on them, and they don't seem to point towards anywhere. So.
Well, this is, but the thing is, is this a technology? Because the Romans are really good at stealing other people's technology. Mm-hmm. Is this something they saw and going, oh, that's a good idea? We're try it out on the road. But
there's an interesting one here, Robert, because. See where this 250 meters sign there? That is where the Ridgeway crosses the one side.
Yeah.
And at that point, there is this great big huge anvil-shaped stone.
Is it what? Sorry, say it again.
At this point, we're 250 meters. This one, I can't get mine. See this one here?
Yeah, I've got it. Yeah. Middle right.
Right. This is where the Ridgeway, which comes down here, comes down and cuts the one dike and continues south down here. And at that point there's a great big huge stone, which is anvil shaped.
Anvil, that's right. Anvil.
And it's been referred to in various documents and things for hundreds of years. It looks like it's been there forever. Which is quite an interesting one, because that again to me is a classic. It's on the lay. It's
Crossroads as well, yeah.
Well, yes, one of these marker stones.
How big is that, Bob? Roughly?
It's huge.
All right, okay.
Huge. You wouldn't be able to pick it up, Ross.
Well,
albeit that the farmers actually, since I first seen it, has got a front end loader and turned it up that way so that he can get his tractor, his wider modern tractor and trailer units through it.
Yeah, pretty
so he turned it on its side, which is quite disappointing, because actually, to see now that it's an anvil shape, you've got actually look at it from the side. I first saw that 40 years ago, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay, well, brilliant. Well, I think we're going to start wrapping up now. It's fantastic. Have you got any things you want to add to it, Robert? I'm blown away by the whole thing. I think it's fantastic.
Is it enough? Is it enough?
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's convinced me. Is there anything you want to add to it?
It's good enough for Einstein. If it's good enough for Einstein,
it's good enough for Einstein. It'll do for me. I've got a better appreciation of where Robert's coming from and his vision of how the landscape looked. I think that's something I'm going to take away and looking at. As you know, I'm looking at this one like and these things like this. We'll probably come back in a couple of weeks. I've got a theory that you could actually make this one like work.
Yeah, you haven't mentioned the thing you found. Yeah.
No, but we'll do that.
Think right now with the new information. All right, yes, a bit late.
It's 9:30. Otherwise, you're going to turn it.
Yeah. I will have part 3 soon, but also I think that's a good place to pause it there, because you gave me a few clues. I didn't want to know too much because I wanted to react on the camera. But
I'm going to be out at once like next week.
But I think with
I've got some things I want to look at, and I think I can put something together to make this work.
Yeah, we're gonna make the canal, Robert. There you go. We'll bring you along for that one, mate. When we launch the new canal.
Good luck for your walk. There are. I don't know if you want to look at the excavations of Wansdyke by Pitt Rivers.
Pitt Rivers, yeah, I've already looked at those.
He identified still flowing water within Wansdyke. I don't know if you've seen it, but it definitely be something I would make a bead right to that, because that would actually prove it one way or the other.
I'll tell you about Bob now, Rob. I should say it's the beginning. I think all the places you picked out in your books and that Bob has visited, and we're going to go and visit them as well. I'll say We'll work out to get you there as well. The docking point, the Isle of the Stones. Bob is like giving me a complete potted history of your books. So there you go. But what do you have? One extra little trick that might add to the story.
Like when it's abandoned.
Here's just a photograph of the Kennet and Avon when someone left all the locks open.
It's still usable. Look, it's still usable. It's got a bit of water there. It's still usable. See, a prehistoric man would say, "That's plenty. That's okay with me. I don't need it anymore."
The water's all drained off, but actually, you can still drag a boat along there.
Yeah, no. In the middle section, you could still drag a boat along. Yeah,
drag a boat. That's exactly. Boat. It's very practical. These guys were very practical.
But the Kennet and Avon is a very sophisticated canal because it relies on pumping water in order to keep the water levels up because at the height. But
the other thing, Bob, that's a brilliant picture is that look at the mud.
Yeah.
So easy to drag something along.
Oh yeah, no. Yeah. You just need that bit in the middle, and you could drag a small boat along there for forever.
Just keep it wet. Yeah.
So which way is that flowing, Bob?
That's at scene, so it's going that way.
Well, there we are. Well, that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much. We'll bring it to an end as well. I just want to finish one little bit of trivia I'm going to throw in. Is that you mentioned the locks. The longest run of locks in the world used to be in Abercunnan, just a few miles up from me. And my grandmother lived on Lock Street, so there you go. That was her address, Lock Street. I think it's ridiculous. It's like 60 locks in about a mile or something, it's about this steep. And if only they'd known, all they needed to do was just let the mountain get a bit muddy and they could have saved 60 locks. Because that's hard work, opening and closing 60 lock doors, I tell you. That is a lot of work. That's a lot of work. So thank you very much, Robert and Bob. And I hope everyone enjoyed that. Thank you for all those people who commented and joined in. Also, one last look. I know someone's talking about, a little bit off topic, with the water levels creating electricity and all sorts of weird stuff, but I think that'll be it for tonight. Thank you. Stop sharing. So brilliant. And I think we'll give Bob a week or two to go and do his ground research, because he's one of the things I love about Bob is you go somewhere and he will go and really think it through and research it, and then we'll have round 3 then. I think I was.
Well, I do think I thank both you and Bob, because I'm a scientist. I don't want people to say I'm right. I want to say, actually, have you thought about that? Because it makes me think a bit more. And that bit which I didn't actually put in my book about the rainwater dates is something I didn't even, until you've mentioned it, didn't even research it. So
I'm glad you said that. Yeah, because I made a note here to say that I'm impressed with Bob's question and everything, and people really shouldn't. And your reaction to it, to me, has been absolutely wonderful, because the one hand, the question is a genuine question. I like your idea, but how does this and this work? People shouldn't feel threatened by questions. You didn't feel threatened.
I mean, at the end of the day, if you're open-minded, you just turn around. I won't get it 100% right. I'm not Einstein.
This is how we move on, though, isn't it? You move on by asking questions in a civilized way with a genuine question. It's not just being awkward or, no one likes it says, "Oh, that's a load of rubbish" or whatever. But if someone comes up to you and says, "Hang on a second, there's a problem. How do you going to deal with this? How do you deal with that?" And you've either got an answer or you haven't, didn't it? It's.
I want people to ask me awkward questions, because otherwise I get lazy. I get lazy and say, "I've answered that." If Bob come up and say, these are too steep. Why is they too steep? And I have to go and research it and it finished and there was a river there. Yeah. Then I've done a bit of research which I haven't done before, and Bob's helped me in the future. So
like a lake to me, even perhaps falls into a lake, but whatever, doesn't really matter.
I go for harbour. I like harbours. I'm a harbour.
We'll have to do your wooden lighthouse sometime as well.
Oh,
I'll start to look at all your books.
Probably like that, because that's what I call engineering.
Right, excellent. So next time we'd have Bob's ditch research, and I'm not going to spoil it because he's told me some little snippets, and it's very clever. So there's a little sneaky trailer for next time, and then we'll see what your reaction is to that.
We'll see where it comes.
So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Try and work out how to turn this all off now without it all just going horribly wrong. It could be an abrupt end. Oh, lost our musician. I think they've all gone to bed. I better go to bed as well. So or at least lead them to bed. So good night, and thank you very much.
Good night, guys.
I really appreciate it, gents.
Night, Bob.
Wonderful.
Cheers,
Nice to talk to you, Robert.
Yeah, you yourself.
Finally.